The insects and invertebrates that we encounter in Fallout 4 could be said, for the most part, to be a tad hostile. Never one for conversation, they generally approach us with the aim of paralyzing us and slowly drinking our liquefying insides, lay their young in us, or just outright tear us apart and feast on the remains. Unfortunately, today, at Dry Rock Gulch, we don't really see a change in this relationship. In fact, this is arguably one of the worst we've seen, and it's all because of the Bloodworms, the horrific creature introduced to us here in this very park. However, this is not the only story we'll look at today. We'll be taking a look at this park before the bombs dropped, finding out about the people who worked here and came here. We'll take a look at the tragic story of the traders who came here seeking refuge and found anything but. Lastly, we shall take a look at the strange military presence here that is, honestly, quite hard to explain. We'll cover the main quest here and the Bloodworms, along with the story of the traders first, then the rest of the areas in this park, and lastly, the military. If you enjoy the video, please like and comment, as it really helps out performance. And if you want to make sure you get notified of new videos, click the bell icon. Now, let's take a look at these horrific little invertebrates. As we enter the front entrance of Dry Rock Gulch, we actually get some warning of the worms that lurk within in the form of a very blunt sign that just says, "Danger Bloodworms." Now, of course, we don't know what those are, but our character seems to from a conversation with the sheriff later. Likely, someone from Calder's radar group or other traders put it up, as it definitely couldn't have been the traders here, given the horrible end they met, as we'll see. Now, as soon as we get close enough, the Bloodworms strike, leaving behind clouds of dust like shit BMX bikes as they rocket out of the ground at us, ready to devour our faces. We'll get into the Bloodworms later, along with all the disturbing information we get about them. For now, all you need to know is they're here, they're near, and they're probably going to burrow up your rear. What we need to do is get into the park and talk to the sheriff, or more specifically the protectron with an irritating personality mode.
This whole area is infested with bloodworms and who knows what else. It's not safe.
You must mean the no good outlaws that are coming out of Mad Mulligans Mine. Well, partner, if you're interested in lending a hand, I could use a new deputy. What do you say?
You're not making any sense. What is this?
Processing. Confused or concerned visitor. No need to worry. I am just a friendly Nuka protectron, programmed for theme park amusement. Our friendly cowboy personalities will guide you and your loved ones through several fun Wild West activities.
All right, tell me what I need to do.
The door to Mad Mulligans Mine is locked up. I got a spare key in a safe by the theater, but wouldn't you know, I plumb forgot what the combination to the safe was. You'll need to talk to my 3 amigos, Doc, Phospate, One-Eyed Ike, and the giddy-up kid. Prove to them you're tough enough to take on the outlaws, and they'll give you their part of the combination. Good luck, little doggy. And don't forget your complimentary deputy uniform, courtesy of Nuka Cola.
So this whole encounter is very strange, and I feel like we need to talk about it. And by talk, I mean overanalyze it way too much. We know the mine wasn't originally locked up as the traders used it. Additionally, the sheriff knows the Bloodworms are originating from Mad Mulligans Mine, so presumably that was the reason it was sealed in the first place. The traders also could have done it, given the reason we find out why they came here in the first place. Therefore, this could just be the process to get the spare key. But all these tasks seem like they were pre-built or pre-planned for parkgoers. So if that is the case, why was this programmed in? Why allow the parkgoers a way to get a spare key, as that would imply the ride was locked, in which case only the staff should be allowed. If it wasn't for parkgoers, but the staff, then why make it so convoluted for them to get a spare key? The only explanation I can think of is there is in fact some routine to actually authorize a deputy with real authority in the park, and this is how they would go about it. They know there's a threat, but their programming doesn't allow them to deal with it. It has to be done within their confines of their personality and their roles as residents in a Wild West town. Due to the threat, they come up with the strange means by which they assess our abilities, and this will involve us having to encounter bloodworms anyway, as they've already spread throughout the park. Completion of these tasks therefore shows we can handle the overall security threat. Or whoever programmed them just thought it would be hilarious to have people jump through this many hoops to get a spare key. Given what we have seen in our last few videos in this park, this wouldn't really surprise me, to be honest. It could also be that the tasks they set us were what they gave to every parkour, and it was the closest thing they were able to do that would qualify as a test of some sort. Due to this, we then have to go to the Giddy Up Kid, Doc Phospate, and One Eye Ike, and complete their tasks to show that we are tough enough to rain down wrath upon the bloodworms, like the holy fucking ghost. Or we could just solve these tasks the way I solve all my problems in game. Charm.
Actually, I really don't want to do this. Can we skip it? Pretty please?
Well, I suppose there ain't no harm in it. All right, here's the third part of the safe combination.
Yes, once again, investing a large amount of points in charisma is truly the best build to have. Now before you start yelling at your screen because we skipped many areas and all the interesting things in them, calm down. Like I said, we'll cover all of that after Mad Mulligans Mine and the Bloodworms. However, you are more than welcome to skip ahead using the chapters. So, after completing all of their tasks, we can get the key from a safe that I wonder why we couldn't just pick like every other one, or why more safes didn't use combination dials like this one, as the design of them would suggest. Now, let's enter the ride and see exactly what has happened here. As we enter, we are greeted by an animatronic that tries to tempt us with a bit of leg, and two mannequins in the back that just stare us out. Being strong of will, we can ignore both, and instead focus on the corpses of the parkgoers that likely died here. There's two to the right of the door, and two by the wall behind the animatronic. These two seem like they were enjoying some food or drink before they died, possibly waiting in line for this ride, as this seems like the kind that would have a ridiculous queue. Going into the tunnel of the mine, we begin to pass the remains of some of these people who are making their way through the ride. Seems the thick rock walls were not enough to stop the effects of the blast or the fallout, or the walls are fake and aren't actually made of rock. To the right of one of them, we can come across the body of the first of the traders here, Terry Tanaka, and on Terry we can find a note. The contents of the note state that they came to Dry Rock Gulch to make use of its superior defensive position. This is due to the group of raiders attempting to take over the whole park. This was, of course, Coulter's gang, and the rest of the raiders that he brought with them. This would then put Terry in the group that took up residence in the park and was subsequently ousted by said raiders. Likely part of the same group that was looting Galactic Zone, and that Oswald mentioned that he wanted to attempt trade with. The note would also seem to suggest that they didn't know about the Bloodworms, which, as we shall soon see, proved their undoing. Passing Terry, we come to what I think was meant to be a model of a creek-like area, somewhere that was meant to show off, I believe, prospecting or fishing. It's also here that we get one of the most horrific pieces of information in regards to the Bloodworms, or more specifically, their larval stage, but we'll cover all that shortly. Past that small creek, we can enter an employee area that seems to be filled with some of the supplies the traders had stockpiled. Either that or, based off the missile launcher, the staff here took their security very seriously. Next to it is a small shack with some sleeping bags set up in it. This seems to be one of the areas that the people who took refuge here set up in. Likely one of either the 3 people we find here, or the 2 we find outside later. There could be more, but they may have been completely eaten or managed to escape. Further in, we continue to encounter more bodies. Given they are all skeletons, and that several of them have park maps with them, I think it's safe to say that most, if not all, were pre-war parkgoers who got killed here. A little further in, we reach the end of the ride, and the start of the roller coaster. It's also here that the full force of the Bloodworms is observed, along with just how many people seem to have ended up dead waiting for a shit minecart ride. Granted, it's a death with no more dignity than the many other people who died while waiting for things in the various other attractions here, but still, it's not great. In this room we can find the nest of Bloodworms, their queen, and the various incubators they used for their larvae. But first, let's take a look at the rest of the dead here. We can find quite a few bodies in what I assume was a multi-tiered line. You know the ones, the type you see in an airport, and you just lose the will to live, just a little bit. The minecart itself isn't actually full, with only some of the cars having bodies present. This suggests they were still letting people on or off when the bombs hit. Also worth noting is that we can find another length of cars, and they're now finger paint occupants, outside near the entrance. This implies that they had more than one set of carts on the tracks at once. This sounds like it could be dangerous, but it's likely more cost effective to get the next set going before the previous one is finished, to get more people on the ride. I have no idea if this is standard practice. Amusement park workers, feel free to weigh in the comment section. To the right of the ride, we can find the control room, with what seems likely to be one of the employees draped over the controls for the ride, giving further evidence that these people died in the initial blast. Past them, we come to our second survivor holed up here, one Sam Taylor, and she also has a note to help fill us in on the story here. She is apparently aware of the Bloodworms, and that this mine is the type of area in which they would choose to nest. She says down below here in the note, and that is something to remember, as we'll discuss later. She doesn't want to die at the hands of the worms, or the raiders that they fled here from. She says she ran caravans for years out of the park, and led the resistance and holdouts against the raiders. Additionally, we learn that she lost both her mother, husband, daughter and sister to all of this. Or at the least she has them and will lose them when she dies. I looked through my scripts and couldn't find anyone else by the name of Taylor, so it's likely we either don't find out about them, or we haven't encountered them in any of the parks yet. Regardless, she decided to take matters into her own hands, and go out on her own terms. Past her, to the right, underneath the walkway we used earlier, we find the last person here, Ricky Braxton, who may or may not have been part of her caravan. We don't know. The note states that the resistance efforts haven't went well, and they've been pushed all the way back to the mine, presumably by the raiders. This note seems to take place before Sam's, as at this point, all they know is that there are tremors in the walls. They haven't seen the bloodworms yet. That suggests that the current state of the nest came after they arrived, which might also tell us where all of the behedron came from, but more on that later. Past Ricky, we come out into the gift shop at the end of the tour. At the back of it, we can find a terminal that will fill us in on both the pre- and post-war story of this place. The first entry gives us some information in regards to the inventory. The second, however, tells us about the working conditions here. The staff would not be getting time off on Halloween, and were required to be available for at least one shift. It then states that another shift is being added, a midnight shift, which seems to be on top of the previous ones. They may have to work this shift until as late as 2 in the morning. So just another shining example of how great it was to work at this park. The entries after this seem to belong to Sam Taylor, or at least I assume it was her. This all takes place just after the initial raider attack in town. She states they're holed up in the minecart ride. It's strange, as Ricky's notes state they were pushed back to here. I suppose they could have chosen to set up camp in the mines, attempted to protect the wider area of Dry Rock Gulch, and were then pushed back here. The last line, however, is a bit of a laugh. If you'd watched one of my previous videos, no, the folks at Galactic Zone are not having better luck. They were slaughtered by robots. It's interesting to wonder, however, if the group that ran to Galactic Zone were the same ones that were caught there when the Star Cores were taken out, or if this was another group that fled there, not knowing about any of that, and was then taken out when they arrived. If you would like to know more about Galactic Zone, I have an hour-long video on it, which I think you'd enjoy. Entry 2 confirms that they were set up in the mine before they were pushed back here, as some people out in the park have been killed by Coulter's raiders before they can make it back. Now here's where things get uncertain. She states Ricky heard things moving around in the back. However, I find it very unlikely that they showed up here and didn't do any sweep of the mine at all before setting up. Moreover, we find a sleeping bag literally right beside the nest, so I assume this is just referencing the tremors and the sounds coming from the walls. It's possible that, when a large number of them fell back that far, that attracted the bloodworms to breach the mine itself, likely in the part of the floor that we see collapse beside the minecart ride. After this, well, their bodies and notes tell the rest of the story. They didn't survive. I'd say it's likely that this is when Coulter's raiders retreated as well, due to the Bloodworm Infestation. That means that they were probably the ones that put up the sign outside the main entrance. What we now need to discuss are the Bloodworms. I did a video on them a lot of years ago, 6 or 7 now, I think, but they bear mentioning again. As their name suggests, they're a worm, though that's like calling a mirelurk a crab. They're just under the length of a person when in their larval stage, although when they attack and lunge at you, they do have the ability to elongate their body to cover the distance, likely releasing coiled muscle in the process to propel themselves forward. Their body is covered in a series of spikes, or spines, and once they have reached adulthood, they increase in their frequency on the body, and in their length. I assume they're used to help them find purchase on surfaces or the walls of the tunnels they create. Their heads open up into a four-mandibled or jawed mouth, and is ridged in nature. The inside of these jaws is lined with row upon row of teeth. So make no mistake on what they're eating. They are devouring people. They are souls. As they grow, these jaws also increase in size, and the ridges become sharper and thicker, almost like an armor of sorts. They are also in general much thicker, with about 4 or 5 Cs in their later years. As mentioned before, they attack by propelling themselves through the air and biting you. Likely the point is to use their weight to drag you down and overwhelm you, as they almost always attack in packs. It wouldn't really make a lot of sense if they were trying to do anything else, as their lack of legs, arms and height would make any other form of attack a little impractical. The only other variation in offensive measures can be found in the Bloodworms, with a yellow and orange coloration in that they are venomous in nature. Now, it's a little odd why they are not all venomous in nature, as a means to weaken or even paralyze prey would be beneficial to all of them. Apart from this, the only other variation that can be found is that some of them are glowing. Now, this introduces an interesting question. How long do creatures have to be exposed before they become irradiated enough, or their bodies accumulate enough radioactive material that they become glowing? Even among ghouls that prefer to gather around radioactive sources, glowing ones are rare, suggesting it takes a timescale of centuries. Oswald, as we saw, took a long time, at the least over a century, as far as we know. Now, we don't know the lifespan of these creatures, but I think it's safe to say it's probably not as long as that. If they were that long-lived, and given how quickly they spread, I'd imagine there'd be a lot more of them. So why the glowing status then? Well, I think it's likely related to their tunneling. They move about in 2 ways. The first is slithering over the ground at you, sometimes at near comical speeds, to be honest. This is done in a manner similar to snakes, and is likely aided by the spikes in their body. The other means they travel is tunneling through the ground. Strangely enough, they pop out of the ground at such force that they are propelled into the air, but then they just go limp, and they flap about, possibly to mitigate fall damage. Now, they could be pushing the dirt out of the way, but I find it more likely that they are ingesting it and injecting it out the other end, as some worms do. I think this is the reason why some of them are glowing. They are ingesting radioactive soil, dirt and other substances. Yes, 2 centuries on, radiation has died down a lot, but runoff from various water sources can still irradiate the soil of a region, and plenty of material can be buried and still retain some properties. Since they have a greater possibility to ingest more material, they can likely become glowing quicker. Now, when we enter the mine, we see a lot of pretty horrific stuff in there. Before that, I want to talk about the Queen Bloodworm. We encounter her when we enter the main nest, and of course, she is the strongest and most resistant to damage out of all of them, as you would expect. The horrifying thing, however, is how she lays her young, and how they develop. Throughout our time in the mines, we come across multiple Behedron corpses, but despite the Behedron themselves being dead, their bodies are still moving, and when we approach, the horrific truth is revealed. The bloodworm larvae rip out of the Behedron corpse, and immediately attack us. Now, you could argue that is just how they feed, burrowing in and devouring their prey, and you could be right, but given this was their nest, I have another idea. The eggs are laid inside the Behedron, or other prey of suitable mass, hopefully while they are dead, and the young develop inside, devouring the body and growing. This happens until they reach such a size where they need more food, and the body's mostly used up. Then, the stimulus of us approaching causes them to attack. I think this is likely why we've never seen them before, and why they aren't more common. If only a few young need to incubate in prey this size, then there simply wouldn't be enough biomass in the Commonwealth, or elsewhere, to sustain a large population. They didn't use the bodies of the traders, though that doesn't mean they cannot. But if they can't, well, then that limits the amount of animals they could use. I mean, apart from Behedron, you're talking super mutants, Yaguai, and Deathclaws, and those aren't really the easiest prey. I'm gonna rule out mirelurks given their tendency to stick near rivers and lakes, and their hard shells may make it difficult for the young to escape. They are also on the small side. I shudder to wonder what would happen if someone had cloned a large amount of behedron using the facility in Safari Adventure, and then the Bloodworms had got at that. As for why there are so many of them here, I assume these were the behedron the traders brought with them. There was some population of Bloodworms present here already, enough to kill the traders, and then the population exploded after it got access to so much food. At this point, even the raiders in town gave up on the place and pretty much abandoned it, maybe hoping that, after they exhausted their food source, they would die out on their own. Given the presence of the pipes in the nest, I assume they tunneled in that way, possibly coming up from below when they were attracted by the sounds of the fighting. Now that we've covered the main quest here, and the Bloodworms, it's time to talk about the rest of the park. The terminals and holotapes, the strange presence of the military, along with an area in Dry Rock Gulch you can't access until the power's back on. The first place we shall take a look at is the theatre to the right of the sheriff as we enter the park. Immediately, there's an empty pram out here, and likely at one point, a baby was in it. Going in, we find the main deterrent to the Bloodworms in this section of the park. Flying swarms of ants and other ants that try and burrow into your eyes. I didn't actually see the other insects in this park get aggressive against the Bloodworms, but I can't think of any other reason why, on any playthrough, they've not spawned in here. We can find the remains of someone that I assume was controlling the various effects employed in this theatre, and beside them, the safe housing the spare key to Mad Mulligans Mine. The stands by the entrance aren't packed, per se, but then again this was a Saturday morning, so it would be weird if they were. However, enough bodies remain, and this is outside to remember, to suggest there were a good few people here, wasting their morning. The building to the left of this has the first military personnel you see when you enter the park, but we shall get to them later. For now, we want to look at the train wreck, almost literally, of a minecart ride outside this theatre. Now this is, likely like the shows that went on at the outdoor theatre, a total shit show. I called it a crash, but really, as we survey more of the mangled ride and skeletons, it becomes apparent that part of the track just seems to have detached, allowing the minecarts to just fly off the rails. Luckily, the concrete walls, ground, and the soft bodies of the people in front of each passenger were all there to cushion the impact. Joking aside, I find it enormously unlikely anyone walked away from this. Additionally, given we hear over the announcement system about a catastrophe on this ride before, I have to wonder if the bombs even caused this. Or was this a slightly pre-war accident that atomic fire helped remove any liability on the part of the park? We may never know. What we can say for certain is this guy at the front was fucking loving it. Perhaps the only one who was. Maybe they thought the crash was part of the ride? Also, something to add, where is the rest of the track? The part that we see isn't large enough to bridge the gap that now exists, at least to my eyes. Additionally, if somebody was scavenging it, why did they leave that whole part? I suppose it could have been so badly mangled in the crash that it's now unrecognizable, but I still find it odd. I could be wrong, but it just looks to me like there's a part missing. At the very least, the amount of bodies around and on this seems to indicate that, even this early in the morning, this ride was still incredibly popular. And I suppose there are a lot worse ways to go, many such examples of which we've seen in this park already. Moving up to the area near the Giddy Up Kid, we can find what seems to be a few mothers with prams that held their kids at one point. This being a Bethesda game, they aren't too hot on putting those types of skeletons in. Also, if this was meant to be a petting zoo, it was a very poor one, as the horses were literally robotic children's toys. I'm not even sure how they went missing in the first place either, unless that was always an activity that the guests got to do. The graveyard looks fake, but given we know that at least one park employee was disappeared in Safari Adventure, I wouldn't put it past them that this was where one of the more stable managers dumped their victims, and then they just seen the opportunity for another poor addition to Dry Rock Gulch. Past them, we can find a few more victims of the roller coaster, or at least I think they are, given the proximity. Lying behind them are the remains of two traders, one of which has one of the star cores that were stripped from and subsequently traded by the group scavenging Galactic Zone. Now these two are completely torn apart when we find them, and in front of them, when we do, is the body of a bloodworm, which has sadly despawned. Now I checked twice by reloading my saves, and I definitely didn't kill it, and it makes sense if they were attacked by them and then torn apart. If not for that, I would say Coulter's Raiders, but given we find no other bodies here to determine how the other victims of that initial attack were left, we can't be sure. Regardless, they died, and it seems likely they were part of the group that tried to mount a resistance here, and either the Bloodworms or raiders killed them. Now we can head to the other side of the park as you enter and take a look at the concession stand, food court, and most importantly, the toilets. At the rightmost one, we can find some poor sod just expired in a pile of garbage, with what I assume was his cup lying right beside his hand. The state of this area is frankly unbelievable, and is presumably post-war, as there isn't any reason why this would have built up in this manner after it. There is the possibility that some people survived, which we'll talk about with a certain someone on a tower and the military personnel, but unlike with Oswald's setup in the kingdom here, we don't get any information about a large-scale survivor group, suggesting one did not exist. Round the corner of the next drinks dispensing station, we find this majestic creature, one of such will and focus that even centuries later, they remain hanging on to the dispenser lever. They likely also waded through a mountain of trash to do so, given how much is underneath the body. Funnily enough, it's actually the dark flavour of the cola, which as we know from our look at the world of refreshment, had an eye-watering level of alcohol content. That it was just dispensed here with, as far as we can see, no oversight or age verification, is shocking and hilarious. It also probably explains the amount of garbage, as people were blutered when they came to this dispenser. Alternatively, they survived the bombs, only to die here after drinking and eating an unholy amount of park food and alcoholic cola. Taking a look at the food court itself, we can find the remains of 3 people still at their table, likely loving life right up until it was snuffed out by the atomic fire. There's a pram on its side beside them, so it possibly belongs to one of the people at that table. Past that, and another pram, we can find what was possibly the creepiest man in the whole park. Now he could have just been enjoying his time, snapping some photos. Maybe he was even here with his family. But to the left of him are the toilets, and I can't help but wonder if he wasn't just taking pictures of the people going into them. Yes, this is a serious accusation, and I also don't care. Now it may not have been to be a creep. It could just be because the toilets were in absolute state, and he wanted to expose them. Looking at them, it seems that all but one of them were out of order, and one of them was being used to store ammo for some reason. I've no idea if that was pre or post-war. This means that the 9 people in this line spent their last moments waiting to use a toilet, which makes it all the more likely they voided their bladder and bowels upon death. From the person using the toilet, it seems like they went in there to have a cola. They could have just brought it in with them, but I don't know. It just seems weird given all the disposable cups floating around, in which case this line probably didn't need to be as long, and this person decided they wanted to relax. Maybe they didn't know the line was that long, but intentional or not, they contributed to the less than dignified deaths of these people. Good job. Next is the main street of Dry Rock Gulch, where if you lack a silver tongue and or are socially awkward, you get to have a quick draw contest with a robot. Going down it, immediately we can see that, if this place wasn't overrun with bloodworms, it would have made a great settlement. Lots of structures that could be repaired and occupied. If they had lasted this long, they can't be all that badly made. Unfortunately for us, most of them are shuttered. Only 2 of them are still open. One is the building behind One Eye Ike, and inside we can find a skeleton at a table that used to have a hat on. This leads me to believe they were probably one of the employees here that died on the job. Opposite that is another building with another skeleton at a table that I believe was in a similar situation. Apart from that, the main street doesn't have anything else of interest on it, apart from Doc Phosphate's saloon, which is what we'll take a look at now. The saloon itself is in remarkably good shape, given how much time has passed, and what went on here, as the terminal entries will show. In it, we can find a lot of people sprawled in stools, over tables and by walls, and honestly, apart from the fact they're dead now, I doubt much has changed. Let's just say I think the quantum machine was barely touched in this place, compared to the stronger stuff. Up the stairs, we can find a woman reclined at a fairly precarious angle, one which she also likely occupied before death as well, possibly while giving the person at the end of this floor quite a look. Or they passed out like this. The person at the end, going off of the hat like the other 2, could likely be a park employee as well. Probably someone put here to make the place look more authentic. But I've alluded to things enough. Let's read the terminal entries here and find out just why this saloon was the worst place to work in Dry Rock Gulch. The first section is for requests and has a total of 4 of them, the first being snacks. It was requested by Vinny. Shockingly, the alcoholic drinks are outselling the non-alcoholic ones, and due to the absence of food, people are just operating on pure liquid lunches. This of course will mean they get drunk a lot quicker, which isn't great for staff. Moreover, they aren't allowed to cut them off, you know, like a normal bar would. Overall, a very reasonable request, especially when you consider you could charge a lot for the food, like they say. But if that affects the amount of drink purchased, then they may have rejected this request. Next is hiring, and it's by Sven, the one who wants his customers to get blocked. Someone called Barb quit, and given what we shall find out as we continue to read, good on her. He wants to use someone named Jenny. Now she can apparently pass for 18. This is presumably important as they need to be over 18 to serve alcohol. Yet they have self-service stations outside where the customer can just do it themselves. Unless of course those required a special adult pass to use. However, this is odd as I always assumed the drinking age in-universe was 21, like in the real US. Unless you can sell alcohol if you're over 18, but not purchase it till you're 21. Just like the amusement park workers. Bar staff, we seek your wisdom. Also, the way he says she could pass for 18 easy just seems a little off, to be honest. After this is Time Off by Vinny, and I can already hear management laughing. We get confirmation that the parents of the kids were getting drunk, and I have to wonder who is vomiting more, the children on a near lethal dose of sugar, or their parents getting drunk to cope with them. My gut tells me it's the parents. Also, this last line about breaking up fights really seals it on why this was the worst part of Dry Rock Gulch. I mean, imagine going to an amusement park with your kids and picking a fight with someone after you got drunk. They definitely needed some security in here. The last request is from Carol. I have to disagree with her. If you decide to get drunk, you are definitely responsible for your own injuries. Crawl off to the first aid at the main town yourself, you absolute loser. That the staff would have to do this is unbelievable. The first aid should be for genuine injuries caused by accidents or unforeseeable circumstances, not because of John, father of 4, his alcoholism, and his glass fucking jaw. I gotta say though, that authentic drunk tank idea is gold. It would have been great if we come to the sheriff's building and they were just packed with skeletons. The only other entry is the same one regarding the Halloween schedule that we already saw in the mine gift shop entries. The last street to look at is just to the right of the previous one, and the first thing I want to look at is one of the military members. I know I said I would cover them at the end, and I will, but this was just too funny and weird for me. They're hiding in these bushes. I have no idea why. The only other one outside of the locked area we look at the end is posted up on a building, with a great view of the main entrance, and lots of cover. This one is just in a bush, facing the wrong way. I mean, yeah, they're close to the other entrance, but you can barely see it from here, and someone will already be in the park by then. Moreover, there are several buildings that would offer excellent lines of sight and cover over that entrance. So, I don't know what happened here. Maybe they got injured before they could set up. Maybe they had another reason for being here. Or maybe they died when the bombs hit, and they just camped out in these bushes pre-war, for reasons known only to themselves. The other thing I want to talk about is the minecart ride on the exterior of the park. Now, we know it wasn't just for show, as we saw it inside, and we saw it outside with the cart and the tracks. But then why is it that it's boarded up on both ends? Yeah, there's also a solid wall behind it, but forget about that for now. Who did this? I want to say it was the traders, but that might fall apart when we look at the other entrance a little later on. Further down this street, unlike the last one, we can find a lot more skeletons. I suppose given this street had the mine and some games, it was just more popular, whilst for the other one, you'd probably only go down that for the saloon. The Brahms here seem to have their parents, which is better than what we saw in the food court. All that is left here is to take a look at the strange survivalist person on top of old Sugartop, and the holotape of one of the staff here, Christy. Given it's found on a table with a skeleton sitting at it, I assume the skeleton is Christy. So let's have a listen to it, first of all.
The new guy gave up one of the small cowboy cappy plushies yesterday, so Andre fired him. Now he wants me to rig the game even more. I told him, if I keep tweaking it, people are gonna know. But he doesn't give a shit, as usual. At least it wasn't the giant Sheriff Nuka plush. That thing's as big as me and covered in enough dust to choke a small crowd. Maybe Heidi can use me in One-Eyed Ike's quick draw. Anywhere's better than here.
So the tape is, if you can believe it, about how the games here are rigged. I am shocked and I am shook. It's just so out of character for what you would expect in this park. Think of the children. But seriously, she was definitely right. You can only rig a game so much, and it sounds like the first guy mentioned got fired because someone won. That implies that literally no one is meant to be able to. I find it hard to believe that people wouldn't notice that at some point, and if it got out, they'd look pretty bad. So yes, whoever Andre was a tool. However, we can assume this tape was recorded shortly before the bombs fell, as Christy Green, if this is her, remains here. It's a bit shocking nobody ever looted the tape, but here we are. Now behind this stall, we can find the other exit for the ride, and again, it's boarded up. Also, the roof of it is really low, so I feel like someone could have had their arms taken off. Now we can find two people here who seem to have snuck up here for a few drinks, and based on the pillows, a bit of fun. The thing is, if this wasn't boarded up when they did this, it's extremely dangerous and they were idiots. If it was, I refer to my previous statement of who did this and when. It could have been the traders who fled here after the raiders moved in, but the inside already seemed like it had safety gates or shutters down. If it was them, then these two people put themselves in a lot of danger, as the ride was still active and flying over their heads while they were up here. If it wasn't the traders, then I have no clue who boarded this up. Heading up to the top of the tower, called Old Sugartop, above the nesting stingwings, we can find this fine fellow, posted up with some military-grade ordnance and a cola. Now, I'll be honest, apart from climbing up here, a run and jump from the cliffs, or him being a sorcerer, I'm at a loss as to how he got up here. I'm not even sure if he's pre or post-war. I can understand how he got up here post-war. Nobody was around to stop him. But pre-war, with everybody about, he doesn't even have any supplies with him, as far as I can see. I also have a horrible suspicion that he may have meant to drop that mini nuke down from here, either on the saloon or the game stall. Maybe this was the guy Andre fired. Behind them, on the tracks, if we go over a tangle of roots and vines, we can find one of the plushies wrapped around it. Now it's hard to say how old this would be, but it must be post-war, as pre-war the ride was still active, and currently the rail's broken and the vines are tangled around it. So someone climbed up here and put this here after the world ended. Maybe it was the fellow on Old Sugartop who just decided to sit there, enjoy the view at the end of the world, and quietly passed away. Now, it's time to talk about the military here. We already took a look at the individual in the bushes, who was there for unknown reasons. However, the military personnel we find on the roof of a building beside the theatre at the entrance is a lot easier. It looks to me like they were set up to cover the primary entrance to the park. They constructed some cover in multiple places. Given the two chairs up here, it may be the person we found in the bushes was, at one point, also set up here, and left for some reason. I'm operating under the assumption that they were here after the bombs hit, as I have no idea why the park would allow armed military personnel to set up like this here. I mean, it's not a sniper's nest, as the Sugartop would have made a better one, but still, you could pick off a lot of people set up like this. They're likely part of the same military force that we can see throughout the wider park, such as those set up in Safari Adventure. Project Cobalt is likely the reason, or at least related to it, but we may need to explore that in detail in a later video. For now, let's have a look at the final area here that the military also took control of. Around the back of Dry Rock Gulch, near a hedge, if you go around behind it, you can find a hidden door that remains locked until you get the power for the whole park back on. Inside it, we come to the employee area of the park, an area with 4 buildings, 3 of them inaccessible, and a shed load of ghouls and mines. Now there's quite a lot to unpack here, and honestly the whole place is a little confusing. When you arrive, you're immediately zerg rushed by a whole carnival full of ghouls. Thankfully, someone has mined this place more than a nation's border. Using the powers of trickery and being a bastard, you can easily lure them into the mines and watch them blast off like Team Rocket, or just turn themselves into a pillow and you can calmly put them out of their misery. Now as to who all of these ghouls were, we'll get to all of that. First off, I want to talk about the other skeletons we find here. Apart from the 2 military personnel, we can find a few around the right side of the building, and one on the left. Now, I believe it's very reasonable to conclude that these are in fact other employees. This area should only have been accessible to them, and we can see from the park that most people did die when the bombs hit. The employees in the area should be no exception. Additionally, this part of the park was locked up tight when we got here. We can't see any other entrances, and the walls are very high. For this reason, I think, apart from the military, we can rule out anyone else getting in here. Now how then all the containers and vehicles got in here with no other entrances, I'm not sure. Knowing this park, they built it around it all, and then realised their mistake way too late. Now that leaves the question of the ghouls, mines, and military personnel. This is where things get confusing. We can find 2 people of the military here. One is set up directly opposite the only entrance, as far as we know, to this place. The other is sprawled out on a pile of refuse on the roof opposite. To be honest, it looks like something killed them, while the other one just looks like they eventually just died, slumped over the sandbags. Moreover, I think it's safe to say that they, if not the other one as well, are responsible for putting in so many mines here. But this is an issue, as it raises several questions. Why did they put down so many? When did they get here? And most confusing, why did the ghouls never set them off in the first place? One possibility I can see, and the only one that makes sense to me, is that they set them up here post-war, mined the place for safety, and waited. At some point they both died. I don't see any evidence that they did it to each other, so possibly just how the others died. Exposure and a lack of supplies. They could have just been here waiting for relief that never came. Now the ghouls are puzzling. If we had shown up here, and there was no mines, I could definitely see these being employees, who had survived the fallout and turned into ghouls over time, much the same way the employees of the kingdom did. However, this usually takes some time, especially to go feral, and we got a lot of information regarding that from the residents in the kingdom and Oswald. It usually takes a few years for the change, and despite repeated exposure to radiation in the kingdom, decades more to go feral. I think this may be what happened here. Yes, as I discussed in that video, we've seen faster and slower examples of both ghoulification and fertilization. But here, I can see it happening quicker. They were likely trapped in here with little supplies and not much in the way of shelter, or at least less when compared to the underground tunnel network Oswald's group had. Due to this, I see only 2 possibilities. The first is they were trapped here before the military showed up, ghoulified, and possibly went feral. If they did this before the military showed up, then their deaths are likely a result of the feral ghouls. If they went after, then they probably just had more resistance to the radiation, and didn't succumb like the military did. If they were trapped here with the military, they could have turned on each other when the military saw what they were becoming, not understanding what it was. The placing of the mines could be a result of a breakdown of trust and cooperation between them. None of this explains, of course, how they avoided the mines for centuries, unless they've literally been inactive this whole time. Not unheard of for ghouls, but still, it stretches believability. The only other option, and the least likely, in my opinion, are the ghouls somehow got in here after, and we stumbled across them shortly after this, or the mines are new. Someone could have come in, seen the military stash of them, set them up, and then left. But I don't see how they could have done this and then got out, and the same for the ghouls, given the dangers in the park, the walls, and the locked door. So this was Dry Rock Gulch, a Wild West themed amusement park with a roller coaster ride with, according to the announcement system, a past tragedy associated with it. Its other main attractions were rigged games and a saloon that had to deal with a lot of drunk parents fighting. When the bombs hit, most of the park's inhabitants died, and a small military force came in after to set up, before ultimately expiring too. We don't know if the ghoul population in the employee area were former employees, but honestly, given the locked nature of the place, I think it's likely. If so, then trapped within those high walls, they all ghoulified and eventually went feral. Years later, when the whole park was being settled, the traders were driven out by Coulter's gang. Some of them fell back to Dry Rock Gulch, specifically Mad Mulligans Mine, where they attempted to put up a resistance of sorts. This ultimately failed. However, it wasn't because of the raiders, but because of the large nest of bloodworms that had taken up residence beneath the mine. These carnivorous worms killed the majority of the traders, except for Sam, who, as far as we know, went out on their own terms. After this, either because of the traders before they died, or the protectrons or raiders after, the mine was locked up, and a sign placed there to warn all who would approach to leave. We, of course, ignore this, and take up the task of exterminating the bloodworms from the mine and wider park. In doing so, we avenge the traders who, seeking to fight for their home and freedom, were torn apart by these horrific creatures.